He shouldn't have made it out. A U.S. Marine, wrists bound, bruised face pressed against the tinted glass of a stolen SUV, barely conscious, while three German shepherds, ribs showing, eyes burning with purpose, emerged one by one from the Arizona heat like shadows sent by God. They weren't anyone's pets. No tags, no collars, just instinct, memory, and something more. No one knew how they tracked him. No one understood why they wouldn't give up. But as the desert sun broke across the sky, those dogs made a choice no soldier would forget. What follows is a story of loyalty that walked through fire, of silent prayers answered by pause, not words. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you believe animals carry pieces of heaven within them, hit that subscribe button. This story, it may change the way you look at dogs forever. The desert stretched quiet and dry under a sky the color of bleached linen. It was late afternoon in Tucson, Arizona, and a thin wind carried the dust of the Sonoran Plains across the sun-faded parking lot of Saguaro Stop, a highway diner just off Route 86. The air was warm but tired, as if the day itself had grown old. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, casting long, striped shadows across cracked tile floors and the faded Formica counter that had seen decades of travelers, truckers, and drifters. Behind that counter stood Sylvia Ramirez, a woman of about 50 with deep-set hazel eyes and a jawline hardened by years of holding back words she never got to say. On the wall behind her hung an old, faded photograph of a young Marine with a wide smile, her late husband, Felix. She wore her long black hair tied into a bun and had the presence of someone who once laughed easily, but hadn't in years. A widow for over a decade, Sylvia had lost Felix in a training accident in Pendleton. After that, she bought the diner with her savings and the military's compensation. She kept the place open more out of routine than profit, offering coffee and quiet to anyone passing through. Her kindness came in measured doses now, not out of coldness, but from a fear that soft hearts bruise too easily. Sylvia was wiping down the glass napkin holder when the bell above the door gave a soft chime, though no human entered. Instead, 3 German shepherds padded in slowly, one after the other. The room fell still. A man in the corner lowered his paper, and a young woman near the jukebox paused her song selection. The dogs were dusty, ribs faintly visible, their fur unkempt, but their eyes were sharp. The first, tall, lean, and dark-coated, stepped forward with cautious confidence. His ears were erect, his eyes alert, but not aggressive. This was Alpha, the oldest. His muzzle was silvered with age, and a faint scar traced over his right eye like an old battle line. The second dog, Bravo, was slightly smaller, with a sable coat and a distinct patch of white on his chest. His movements were more erratic, his nose twitching constantly, sampling 1,000 scents the humans in the room were blind to. The third, Charlie, was the smallest, barely a year old, with wide paws and an anxious energy that betrayed his youth. They stopped at the entrance, scanning the room as if judging the atmosphere. Sylvia stepped from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, you boys look like you've walked across half the state," she murmured, kneeling gently. "Thirsty?" She filled a wide stainless steel bowl with water and placed it near a corner rug. The dogs approached slowly. Alpha drank first, calmly. Bravo next, slurping noisily. Charlie hesitated until Sylvia stepped back, then bounded forward like a child finally allowed to play. No collars, no tags, just the look of dogs once trained for something important, and then discarded. People in the diner went back to their meals. The jukebox played a dusty Merle Haggard track. Outside, a large gray SUV had parked silently near the edge of the rest stop, right where the pavement gave way to mesquite brush. Sylvia didn't notice it at first. Not until Bravo, halfway through his drink, stopped suddenly and stared through the window. His ears shot up. A low whine escaped his throat. Charlie stiffened, then released a low growl, the kind that started in the chest and vibrated through the floor. Sylvia turned toward the window just in time to see Alpha sitting upright, posture rigid, eyes narrowed toward the SUV as if waiting for something unseen. Then the door opened again. This time a man did enter. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, dressed in a gray tailored suit with blonde hair combed neatly to the side and icy blue eyes that seemed incapable of blinking. He wore a slim leather shoulder holster, though the jacket did a poor job of hiding it. He moved like a man who expected the world to part for him. This was Elliot Crane, though no one in the diner knew his name yet. He took a seat at the counter, 3 stools away from a weary trucker who gave him a brief nod. Sylvia approached with a coffee pot. "Evening," she said. "Need a menu?" "No," Elliot replied without looking at her. His voice was calm, clipped, and utterly uninterested. "Black coffee, that's all." Sylvia poured it. "We have warm pecan pie if you're hungry." He didn't answer, just stared out the window toward his SUV. Sylvia glanced over, following his line of sight. Something in her gut twitched, a cold knot of unease, but she didn't press it. She turned back to refill another customer's mug. Bravo had not stopped watching the SUV, neither had Alpha. Charlie lay down reluctantly, but his ears stayed perked. Sylvia noticed the tension in their bodies. Trained dogs didn't twitch without reason. The diner fell into a lull. The young woman by the jukebox finally picked a song, and old country music crackled out over the speakers. Sylvia returned to the counter, wiping crumbs from the pie display. Then she felt a stare. She turned. Elliot was watching her now. Not intensely, not overtly, but with the kind of glance a predator gives a passerby it has already judged unthreatening. His hand rested near his coffee, but Sylvia's eyes were drawn to the edge of his coat, where the leather strap of his holster peeked out. "Refill?" she asked evenly. "No." She stepped back. Alpha stood now, slowly, deliberately. He faced the window again. Sylvia followed his gaze. The SUV's engine was still running. All its windows were heavily tinted. She narrowed her eyes. It wasn't the car. It was the stillness of it, the way no one had stepped out, the way Alpha's body shifted subtly, one paw forward, like he expected something to happen. In that moment, Sylvia remembered something. When she first met her late husband, Felix, he'd told her about the canines in his unit. "A shepherd won't bark unless there's something wrong," he had said. "But when they sit that still, it means they're thinking, measuring." Alpha wasn't just watching, he was calculating. Sylvia turned toward Elliot. He hadn't moved, but now his right hand hovered over his coat, almost absent-mindedly. A siren passed faintly in the distance. Just a highway patrol headed the other direction. But at the sound, Elliot's shoulders tensed, his fingers grazing the butt of the concealed weapon like muscle memory, like he was used to reacting quickly. But he didn't flinch. Sylvia's stomach sank. Charlie whined softly. Alpha took 2 steps forward. The sun dipped further behind the low hills outside, and the shadows in the diner grew long. Sylvia tightened her grip on the towel in her hand. Something was not right. Not just with the man, not just with the car, but with the air itself, like it was holding its breath. And the only ones who noticed were three silent dogs who hadn't barked once since they came in. The wind outside had picked up slightly, rattling the wind chimes that hung crooked above the diner's entrance. Dusk painted the sky in muted hues of mauve and burnt orange, casting a violet glow across the dusty asphalt and brushing the old signage of Saguaro Stop with an eerie calm. Inside, the room remained suspended in an unsettling hush. Elliot Crane hadn't touched his coffee. The three dogs hadn't moved from their corner. Then, with a sharp but restrained whine, Alpha shifted. His ears flicked once, twice. Then he turned his head towards Sylvia, not with urgency, but with the gravity of a soldier waiting for orders he already knew were coming. His golden eyes locked with hers, holding a kind of understanding few humans ever truly grasp. Then he let out a low, breathy sound, not quite a growl, not quite a bark, and stood. Sylvia, still behind the counter, caught it. Something was happening. She set her cloth down slowly. Alpha turned, padded softly toward the glass door, and nudged it open with his snout. The bell chimed. No one stopped him. Not Bravo, who stayed crouched with muscles tight, nor Charlie, who had grown strangely silent. And not Sylvia, who watched the old dog disappear into the failing light, with a chill coiling at the base of her neck. Outside, the SUV still sat under the yellowed parking lot lamp, its engine a steady hum. The tint on its windows remained impossibly dark, but Alpha didn't approach the front doors. He moved around to the side, sticking close to the shadows cast by the shrub-lined curb. He stopped when he reached the rear passenger door. He crouched. Inside, the faintest of movements. The SUV rocked slightly, nothing noticeable to a passing glance. But Alpha wasn't just passing. He crept closer, his nose nearly brushing the paint, and looked up. A sliver of space between the sunshade and the window frame revealed the whites of an eye. And then slowly, deliberately, the man inside blinked once, then again, then a third time. Each blink was labored as though forced. His face was bruised, one eye nearly swollen shut, a cut along his jaw, but the other eye locked with Alpha's, and again, blink, blink, blink. Alpha sat still as stone. Back inside the diner, Glenn Murdoch, a retired school janitor who now spent his evenings nursing tea and gossip, leaned over the counter. Glenn was in his late 60s, short and wiry with sun-worn skin and a permanent squint. He wore the same red flannel shirt every week, the sleeves frayed and patched at the elbows. "You know," Glenn said in a gravelly tone, "I've seen those dogs before." Sylvia, still watching the doorway, turned slightly. "Where?" "Flood cleanup last month east of the Santa Cruz Wash," Glenn replied, tapping his mug. "Sheriff's department was searching for a missing woman. Those three showed up near the wreckage of a trailer, just sat there watching. Thought they were strays, but not one of them barked at the canines, and not one got in the way. Like they understood." Sylvia furrowed her brow. "You think they were trained?" "Maybe military," Glenn nodded. "Or rescue, but they didn't have tags. Didn't stick around after the teams left either. Just vanished." Outside, Alpha remained rooted beside the SUV. He didn't growl, didn't whine, just stared. The eye inside stared back. And then, in the faint reflection of the window, Alpha saw it. Hands bound, duct tape across the man's wrists. His posture was slumped, but he was still seated upright. Alpha tilted his head. The man blinked again. Blink, 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 S.O.S. Inside the diner, Elliot Crane's fingers tapped once on the counter. Not idly, but rhythmically. the kind of tap a man uses when he's measuring time. He picked up the coffee, took a single sip, then set it down again. His eyes hadn't left the parking lot, Sylvia noticed. Her instincts flared. She glanced at Bravo. The dog was frozen, ears forward, mouth closed tight. Charlie had backed into the far corner, tail down, his breathing fast. Sylvia grabbed her phone from under the register, but before she could dial, the door swung open, and Alpha stepped back inside. He didn't return to the rug. He didn't even glance at the other dogs. Instead, he walked to Sylvia, his steps steady, commanding, and sat directly in front of her. Then, slowly, he lifted one paw and tapped it on the floor. Once, twice, 3 times. Sylvia's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Glenn, who had turned pale. "You saw that too?" Glenn nodded. "That's a code." Sylvia swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened her phone again. She didn't call the police. Not yet. She tapped a different number. The woman who answered had a crisp, no-nonsense voice. "Sheriff Rachel Moreno speaking." Sylvia kept her voice low. "Rachel, it's Sylvia Ramirez. I need you to come to Saguaro Stop, now." "Why? What's going on?" "There's someone in a vehicle. I think he's in danger. And Rachel, I think my dogs just saw him blink S.O.S. Rachel was silent for a beat. "Your dogs?" "They're not mine," Sylvia replied. "But they know, and I trust them." "I'll be there in 10. Rachel Moreno, 45, was a sharp-featured Latina with short-cropped hair, deep lines around her eyes, and a reputation for trusting instinct over protocol when it mattered. She'd served 2 tours as an MP in the Army before returning to Arizona to work in law enforcement. Sylvia had known her since they were teens, and if there was anyone who wouldn't laugh at the phrase, "A dog saw an S.O.S., it was her. Sylvia hung up and placed the phone down slowly. Bravo stood now. Charlie crept toward the door, eyes flicking between Sylvia and Alpha as if waiting for permission. The bell above the door chimed again, this time softly, as a young man entered. Tall and lanky, with a dust-covered backpack and sunburned cheeks, he looked like he'd walked from somewhere far. He was no more than 23, wore cracked boots and a patched denim jacket. His name, as Sylvia would learn later, was Micah Dade, a hitchhiker trying to get back to Albuquerque. For now, he simply smiled nervously and took a seat near the jukebox. His entrance had broken the tension, but not the dread. Elliot Crane glanced at the boy, then at the door. Then he turned and met Sylvia's gaze for the first time since entering. Her blood chilled. It wasn't suspicion in his eyes. It was certainty. He knew she knew. And now the dogs knew it too. Darkness fell fast in the Arizona desert. One moment the sky was painted in strokes of lavender and amber, and the next it had faded into a deep blue void pierced by the occasional distant blink of stars. At Saguaro Stop, the fluorescent bulbs inside buzzed faintly as they flickered to life, casting a sickly yellow glow across the chipped linoleum floors and rusting chrome of the diner's worn booths. The buzzing blended with the hum of the HVAC unit, both trying in vain to fight off the growing cold that crept in with nightfall. Alpha had returned to Sylvia's side, lying down but far from relaxed. His body was taut, his ears pivoting at every small sound. He didn't close his eyes. Instead, he faced the window, the same gray SUV still idling just beyond the glass. His gaze remained fixed, unmoving, yet his breathing was measured, as if he were balancing calculation with restraint. Sylvia glanced down at him and saw the tension radiating from every inch of his aged frame. She returned to her post behind the counter, wiping down a coffee cup she didn't remember picking up. Bravo, meanwhile, moved with almost military caution, slinking closer to the booth where Elliot Crane sat. The man still hadn't touched his coffee. Instead, he had his hands folded on the table, fingers pressed together in a steeple beneath his chin. His pale eyes didn't blink often. He just stared out the window, at the SUV, at Sylvia from time to time, and now at Bravo, who approached without growling. Bravo stopped a few feet from the man's booth. The sable-colored dog locked eyes with Elliot and tilted his head slightly. Elliot offered the faintest of smirks. "I don't like dogs," he said aloud, his voice smooth and northern accented, like someone from Connecticut who had learned how to sound charming without meaning a word of it. Sylvia wiped her hands on her apron and approached. "They're not bothering you, are they?" Elliot's gaze flicked to her. Not yet. At that moment, Charlie, the youngest of the three, let out a sharp, sudden bark. Not a prolonged series, just one loud, clear snap of sound that shattered the diner's unease like a dropped glass. It made the teenage waitress jump in the back, nearly spilling a tray of onion rings. Sylvia's shoulders tensed. She turned toward Charlie, who had planted himself near the entrance, his body low to the ground, tail rigid, teeth bared, not in aggression, but in warning. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Elliot raised an eyebrow and slowly reached for his coffee cup. Bravo didn't move. Alpha stood now, padding forward with deliberate steps. He joined Charlie near the door, then pivoted to look toward Sylvia. Then slowly, with a precision that spoke of deep training, he lifted his front paw and began to drag it across the dusty floor. One short line, then a second, then a third. Sylvia froze. 3 parallel lines. Her mind jumped. 3 short taps, 3 blinks, 3 lines. The same message. S.O.S. Her throat tightened. A memory hit her. Felix, her late husband, showing her how soldiers in captivity signal distress when they can't speak. 3 blinks, 3 knocks, 3 lines. Not just random protocol. "I swear," she whispered under her breath. "These dogs know." As if on cue, Alpha looked at her, eyes unwavering. The door opened, jangling the bell again. The tension snapped as a truck driver walked in, tracking dust with each step. He was broad-shouldered, in his late 30s, with a sunburnt neck and a diesel-scented jacket. He had that familiar long-haul look, half exhausted, half detached from the world outside the Zuxu road. His name was Doug Fenley, a regular who usually stopped in for coffee and pie on his Tucson to Yuma run. He spotted the dogs immediately and chuckled. "Well, now this is new," Doug said, stepping around Charlie. "Didn't know y'all were a rescue shelter now, Sylvia." "They came in earlier," she said carefully. "Strays, maybe. Or something more." Doug crouched next to Charlie, reaching out with a big, weather-worn hand. "This one looks like he's still a pup. A little jittery, huh, buddy?" Charlie backed away immediately and growled. Not a threatening snarl, but a protective one. His teeth flashed white. Doug blinked, then stood up. All right. Don't want no trouble." He turned back towards Sylvia. "You sure they're safe? If not, I got a big old crate in the back of my rig. I could take this one off your hands for the night. Pup like that probably just needs rest." Sylvia was about to respond when Charlie stepped forward and planted himself between her and Doug. Hackles raised. It was a clear message. "I think he's made his opinion known," she said. Doug chuckled awkwardly, scratching his head. "Suit yourself." He moved to sit at the counter but kept one eye on the dogs. Elliot Crane, however, hadn't moved. He slowly set down his cup, now empty, His fingers returned to tapping, soft, steady beats on the plastic tabletop. Bravo remained beside his booth, staring. Alpha turned back toward the window, then resumed his position near the corner. Charlie retreated beside him. Sylvia moved behind the register, heart still racing, and opened her phone again. A new message had arrived from Sheriff Rachel Moreno. 5 minutes out. Stay calm. Keep eyes on him. Don't escalate. Sylvia looked across the room. Bravo still hadn't broken his gaze from Elliot, whose expression remained unreadable, except for a slight tightening at the corners of his mouth. He knew. Somewhere in the distance, a siren cried. Faint, barely audible but real. The shift in the air was subtle, like the diner itself had inhaled and decided not to exhale. Outside, the night had swallowed the horizon whole. Desert silence pressed thick around Saguaro Stop, broken only by the faint rumble of the idling SUV and the neon hum above the diner signage, which blinked like a tired eye in the dark. Inside, the tension had settled into something tactile. Everyone felt it, though no one named it aloud. Behind the counter, Sylvia Ramirez stood still, her phone in hand. She had just finished speaking with Sheriff Rachel Moreno, confirming what both women already sensed deep down. This wasn't just a bad hunch or a strange customer. Something dangerous was unfolding, and the clock was running. Sylvia turned to glance at the 3 dogs, but Alpha was gone. She blinked, searching. Bravo sat stiffly near the door, ears angled back, while Charlie crept forward like a soldier through tall grass, tail low, body coiled. Then, in the space of 3 seconds, both dogs turned as if answering a silent command and slipped through the exit, the door swinging softly on its spring hinge behind them. The bell chimed once, then silence again. Outside, the desert wind shifted, and the distant sound of tires crunching gravel broke the stillness. At the window, Elliot Crane stood, sliding his credit card across the counter toward Sylvia with practiced ease. "Keep the change," he muttered, his tone thin with annoyance. Coffee was stale anyway. Sylvia didn't speak. She simply nodded and watched him slide his jacket over his shoulder, his movements deliberate. One final glance at the room, then he stepped into the dark, his profile vanishing beyond the halo of parking lot light. Moments later, from where she stood near the doorway, little Cassie Fenley, a freckled 8-year-old in pink overalls and light-up sneakers, shrieked, her voice cutting through the hum of the diner like a siren. "Daddy, the dogs are fighting!" Her father, Doug Fenley, leapt from his stool and sprinted for the exit. Several patrons followed, including Micah Dade, the young drifter with sunburned cheeks and frayed boots. Sylvia dropped her towel and rushed after them, heart hammering in her chest. Outside, the scene was anything but a dogfight. Under the flickering floodlight, Elliot stood frozen halfway between the diner and his vehicle. But he wasn't alone. Alpha had emerged from the low brush beside the lot, standing squarely in front of Elliot's path, chest heaving, but gaze sharp as ever. His stance was defensive, not violent, but unwavering. A moment later, Bravo flanked the rear of the SUV, tail rigid and teeth bared. Charlie, barking sharply, circled behind Elliot, his steps fast and snapping. Elliot reached for his jacket pocket and pulled. Metal flashed in the dim light. The gun rose fast, but Charlie was faster. The young German shepherd launched forward like a coiled spring, his teeth locking onto Elliot's forearm with a crack of bone and fabric. The man screamed, not in pain, but fury, staggering back, struggling to aim the weapon with his free hand. "Get inside!" Doug shouted, grabbing Cassie and shielding her with his body. Micah ducked low, eyes wide, frozen at the doorframe. Sylvia stood her ground, her voice caught in her throat. Elliot dropped the gun. It clattered to the asphalt near the curb as Bravo advanced, his growl deep and thunderous, a sound that didn't belong to a house pet, but to something older, something trained for war. "Stop," Elliot barked, staggering. Blood ran from his wrist where Charlie still held fast, refusing to let go until Bravo stepped between them, nudging Charlie with his flank. The younger dog obeyed immediately, retreating a few paces while panting heavily. Alpha didn't move. He simply stood sentinel, daring Elliot to run. From the SUV, a faint thud echoed. Something, or someone, was trying to move. Sylvia's eyes shot to the vehicle, and her heart dropped. The rear window, coated in a black sunshade, shifted slightly. In the gap at the top corner, a pair of swollen eyes stared out, desperate and pleading. A bound man, barely conscious, slumped against the glass. "My God," Sylvia whispered. "There's someone inside." The standoff outside the diner had erupted into chaos, but the dogs, trained and unified, had kept it controlled. The customers behind her remained at the entrance, watching, unsure if they were witnessing a crime, a rescue, or both. Then came the sirens. Red and blue lights streaked like fire against oil, washing over the parking lot in bursts of color and warning. A county cruiser skidded into the lot, followed by a dark gray SUV with government plates. Doors flew open. Sheriff Rachel Moreno emerged first, her short, dark hair pulled back into a tight bun. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a matte black tactical jacket and boots worn from use. Her presence commanded the scene instantly. Behind her, Deputy Nathan Kim, a lean Korean-American man in his early 30s with sharp features and a calm demeanor, took point near the SUV. Rachel raised her hand, palm outward. "Nobody move!" Bravo backed off slowly, giving space. Alpha held his stance for another heartbeat, then turned away, moving toward the rear of the suspect's SUV. "Gun on the ground," Deputy Kim called out, spotting the pistol. "Subject is bleeding from the arm. He's been bitten." Rachel approached Elliot, her eyes narrowing. "You move a finger and I swear." "There's someone inside," Sylvia cut in, her voice tight with urgency. "In the back. He's bound." Rachel didn't hesitate. She ran to the SUV, Kim at her heels. He smashed the rear glass with the butt of his flashlight, shattering the sunshade. Inside, a man, mid-30s, military build, battered and duct-taped, rolled forward, groaning in pain. Rachel reached for the back handle. It was locked. Alpha was already there. He barked once, short and sharp, then turned and sprinted back to Sylvia as if demanding she come closer. As she approached the broken window, she saw the man's face more clearly now. Beaten, muzzled, but unmistakably alive. And unmistakably a Marine. The desert air had cooled, thick with the smell of engine oil, dust, and adrenaline. Flashing red and blue lights pulsed rhythmically against the cracked walls of Saguaro Stop, painting silhouettes of chaos frozen in motion. The parking lot was a buzz of voices, footsteps, crackling radios, and the steady clink of metal as deputies swarmed the scene. But amid all the noise, there was one fragile moment that held its breath. The moment they pulled the man from the SUV, the back window had been shattered, the black sunshade torn away. Sheriff Rachel Moreno was shouting for bolt cutters, her voice slicing through the noise with razor clarity. But Alpha, ever composed, turned and sprinted across the lot, vanishing for a moment around the side of the diner. I followed with an urgency in my steps, my apron fluttering behind me. passed by Doug Fenley, who was now kneeling with his daughter Cassie, murmuring reassurances. The little girl clung to his arm, her wide eyes locked on the figure in the back of the SUV. Around the corner, Bravo stood waiting, his body angled toward the rear kitchen entrance of the diner. As I approached, he barked once, then darted inside. "A knife," I whispered, half to myself, half to the dog. I burst through the swinging kitchen door and yanked open the bottom drawer near the prep counter. My fingers closed around the carbon steel chef's knife, Felix's old one, the one he used to sharpen on slow evenings. Without a second thought, I rushed back outside, Bravo right at my heels. By the time I reached the SUV again, Charlie was already halfway inside the vehicle. The pup's sharp teeth had already torn through the frayed edge of a seatbelt, wrapped cruelly around the man's chest and shoulders. I saw the duct tape binding his ankles and wrists, the faint shimmer of sweat across his bloodied face. The man was barely conscious, slumped over, his mouth sealed tight with silver tape. Rachel stepped aside, giving me space. I crouched beside the open door, heart hammering in my chest. I cut through the wrist tape first, careful not to nick his skin. His arms fell forward limply. I moved to the ankles, my hands trembling with speed. Alpha stood behind me, positioned between me and the onlookers like a living shield. The tape across his mouth was the last thing I peeled back. As the adhesive pulled away, the man let out a guttural gasp, as though his lungs were remembering how to function. His breath came in short, broken bursts, and his eyes blinked against the floodlight behind my shoulder. Rachel knelt beside us. "Can you hear me?" He nodded faintly. His voice wouldn't come, but his mouth formed a silent word. "Yes." I gently touched his shoulder. "You're safe now." He looked at me, then at the dogs. A tear slipped from his swollen left eye, trailing down his dirt-streaked cheek. Charlie gave a low whine and licked the man's bloodied hand. "Who is he?" asked Deputy Nathan Kim, who stood nearby taking notes, his expression shifting from procedural to reverent. Rachel glanced toward the man's dog tag, which now hung freely from his neck. "Sergeant Troy Maddox, U.S. Marine, missing for 2 weeks." A collective silence fell, as if every breath in the parking lot was held in unison. Troy tried to speak, but only a hoarse rasp emerged. I shook my head gently. "Don't talk. You're okay. Just breathe." A medic team arrived, led by paramedic Sandra Ortega, a compact woman in her 40s with cropped gray hair and firm maternal hands. Her presence was calm and efficient. She helped Troy onto a stretcher, stabilizing his neck with practiced ease. Her assistant Jared, a young redhead with nervous energy and an oversized trauma kit, asked the standard questions, though Troy could barely answer. Still, Sandra's glance toward the dogs said more than anything Troy could say. "He signaled S.O.S, I said aloud. Through the window, he blinked at the dog 3 times. Jared blinked. "The dog?" "They're not just strays," Rachel said. "These dogs knew exactly what they were doing." Meanwhile, Elliot Crane sat cuffed on the curb, his suit jacket torn, blood dripping from the bite wound on his forearm. His eyes remained cold, lips clamped shut. But next to him, a second man was now being led out of the shadows. Martin Greaves, mid-50s, lean and narrow-eyed with skin like creased leather and hands that had seen hard labor. He'd been hiding near the edge of the lot, likely waiting for Elliot to return. Deputies had spotted him trying to slip away. Rachel walked over. Both of them matched descriptions in the FBI's open file on interstate trafficking suspects. Been moving people across state lines under business fronts. No one ever caught them red-handed until tonight. I looked at the dogs again. Alpha sat near the SUV, chest rising slow and steady. Bravo stood next to Sandra's ambulance, watching every move. Charlie had not left Troy's side and now lay beneath the stretcher like a sentry guarding a general. Off to the side, someone lifted a phone. A woman, Tabitha Rhodes, late 20s with dyed purple hair and oversized glasses, began live streaming, breathless with excitement. "This is happening right now in Tucson," she said to her phone camera. "3 dogs just helped rescue a Marine kidnapped by traffickers. You are not going to believe this. Look, that's him. That's the man who was missing. And those are the dogs. Look at them." She turned the camera toward the stretcher, the bloodied soldier, and the dogs standing around him like soldiers in formation. The video would hit 5 million views before dawn. Her caption: "German Shepherds rescue missing Marine in the middle of Arizona." The harsh, fluorescent lights of the Pima County Sheriff's Department buzzed faintly overhead as the clock approached midnight. The station was quieter than usual for such an eventful night. The rush of sirens and scrambling deputies had given way to a tense calm, like the aftermath of a storm where the damage couldn't yet be fully seen. Behind the front desk, a black and white TV played muted news footage of a local wildfire. Coffee brewed in the corner like a metronome, counting seconds no one had time for. Sergeant Troy Maddox sat in an observation room, his body slumped forward slightly, wrapped in a department-issue blanket. His hands, though still bruised, moved with intention as he scribbled in a yellow notepad. His throat had been damaged. Dehydration, bruising, and prolonged silencing from duct tape had rendered him unable to speak above a whisper. But his handwriting, slow and sharp, spoke louder than any voice. Sheriff Rachel Moreno stood across the room, arms folded, watching him. She wasn't a woman prone to sentiment, but something about the sheer will in Troy's hand. How he pressed the pen into the paper like every letter was pulled from pain made her chest tighten. The last thing he wrote before placing the pen down was a single line. "3 German shepherds saved me. I thought I was dead." Rachel picked up the notepad, flipping back a few pages. He had written all he could recall: the luring at the rest stop, the moment of being drugged, waking up in the back of the SUV, the long stretches of driving, and the realization that they weren't just waiting. They were transporting, smuggling, selling. She stepped out of the room, gently closing the door behind her. The hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. A few officers were typing up reports at nearby desks. The mood was different, solemn, as though every badge in the building had been personally bruised by what had almost happened. On a bench outside the interrogation wing, Charlie sat, back straight, ears perked, staring at the closed door where Troy was. His golden-brown coat was dusted with dried blood at the paws from where he had clawed and pulled at the car interior. He had not moved for nearly an hour. "He's been like that since they brought Troy in," said Deputy Teresa Shaw, a tall woman in her late 20s with auburn braids and a quiet, steady tone. "Refused food, refused water. He's just watching." Rachel nodded. "Let him. He's earned it." Down the hallway, I waited in a low chair outside my own small interview room, sipping from a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. Alpha lay under my feet, one paw resting over the other, head nestled between them. His breath came slow and deep, as if the long tension had finally given him a moment's peace. I looked tired. My salt and pepper hair had come loose from its bun, framing a face that now held more worry than strength. I had spent the last 2 hours detailing my interactions with Elliot, what I saw, what I remembered, and the exact moment I knew that the dogs weren't just strays. I hadn't cried, but my hands trembled slightly every time I described Alpha drawing 3 lines on the floor. Meanwhile, Bravo had gone rogue, or rather, Deputy Nathan Kim had let him. Bravo had wandered the department garage, sniffing each vehicle like a customs dog working the border. But he had a purpose, a direction. Nathan followed, holding a flashlight in one hand, notebook in the other. When Bravo reached Elliot's impounded SUV, he circled it twice, tail stiff, nose pressed low. He paused at the back, ears twitching. Then he growled. Short, low. Found something? Nathan crouched beside him. Bravo pawed once at the lower panel of the trunk. An officer opened the SUV and began checking underneath the spare tire. Within seconds, his fingers brushed against the edge of a black plastic bin, duct-taped closed. Inside were several manila folders, laminated IDs, Mexican and U.S. currency, and a stack of fake vehicle titles. Nathan exhaled. Evidence stash. He must have planned to torch the car later. He pulled out a folder. Inside, a list of names. One of them was Troy Maddox. Another name matched a girl who'd gone missing last fall in Nogales. Back inside, Rachel stared at the whiteboard in the operations room, where a map of southern Arizona had been marked with small red pins, each one indicating a missing person, unexplained disappearance, or abandoned vehicle. Troy's timeline fits 3 others, she said to her team. Same border route, same rest stop pattern. If it weren't for those dogs, we'd be calling another family with bad news. At her side, Detective Luis Ortega, early 50s with thick glasses and a meticulous demeanor, nodded as he clicked through security footage on his laptop. Here, he said, freezing the screen. This is from 3 days ago, a gas station 30 miles south. Look in the corner. The black and white footage showed a slow panning view of a convenience store lot. In the background, barely noticeable, the gray SUV pulled in beside a soda machine. And then, across the edge of the frame, 3 dogs. Same stance, same pacing, same formation. They were following him, Ortega said, tracking quietly, like they'd been trained to patrol. Rachel rubbed her temple. That's no coincidence. Military? He asked. Too coordinated for strays, she answered, but too quiet to be deployed. Maybe retired K-9s or dumped after service. Ortega's eyes narrowed. Dumped and still working. Rachel's jaw clenched. More loyal than most men. Outside the station, under the flickering yellow lamppost, Micah Dade stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, staring at the patrol cars. The young hitchhiker had stayed behind to give a witness statement, but hadn't said much. He watched as I stepped out with Alpha at my side, both of us silhouetted under the light. He walked up slowly. I don't know what you fed those dogs, he said, but I owe them more than lunch. I gave a tired smile. They weren't mine. I just didn't turn them away. Behind us, Charlie finally stood, stretched, and padded over to the window. On the other side, Troy looked up and gave the faintest nod, his eyes glistening. The Tucson County Courthouse stood like a solemn monument under a soft gray sky. The building's sandstone facade, weathered by decades of sun and wind, gave no hint of the emotion that rippled beneath its roof that morning. Inside, the wood-paneled courtroom buzzed with restrained energy, a subtle but undeniable hum of cameras, whispered questions, and the creak of old benches filled with reporters, students, and locals drawn in by the headline that had gone viral. German Shepherds rescue missing Marine in the middle of Arizona. At the center of it all sat Elliot Crane in a tailored Navy suit, his face tight and expressionless. The wound on his forearm had healed poorly beneath a bandage, but he never looked at it. His defense attorney, Clinton Rowe, was a heavy-set man in his 50s with slicked-back silver hair and the kind of smile that only stretched when needed. He sat with one leg crossed neatly over the other, flipping through legal pads filled with notes and keywords that had lost their meaning the moment the dogs took center stage. On the prosecution bench, Sheriff Rachel Moreno stood beside Ada Fiona Chang, a petite woman with jet-black hair, quick eyes, and a voice that never needed raising. Fiona was new to the county office, known for her no-nonsense demeanor and a calm that made even seasoned officers listen. She nodded toward Rachel, signaling the start. "Call your next witness," the judge said, his voice gravelly, echoing beneath the high ceiling. Rachel stood. "We call Sylvia Ramirez to the stand." I walked slowly up the aisle, wearing a pressed white blouse and a skirt that hung just below my knees. My hair had been pulled back into a modest bun again, and though my posture was upright, my eyes were tired from long nights and longer memories. Alpha followed beside me, not into the witness box, of course, but sat at the base, ears perked, tail still. Rachel stepped to the podium. "Mrs. Ramirez, can you tell the court what made you first suspect something was wrong that night?" I looked straight ahead. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a man. It wasn't anything obvious. It was a dog's eyes. There was a murmur in the room. I continued. Alpha sat near the door, still as stone, and looked at me. Then he dragged his paw across the floor. Once, twice, 3 times. It wasn't random. It was a message. And when I followed it, I found a man bound and gagged in the back of a running SUV. "Could you identify that man now?" "Yes," I said. "Sergeant Troy Maddox. He was barely breathing." My voice didn't waver. I had told the story dozens of times, but now, under oath, every word carried the weight of truth sharpened by instinct. Rowe stood up, adjusting his jacket. "Mrs. Ramirez," he began, "you've worked around animals for years. Isn't it true you have a personal affection for dogs?" "I respect them," I replied. Respect or project? Couldn't it be possible you imagined the 3 lines due to stress, coincidence, or even the need for closure? I met his gaze directly. I didn't imagine a man tied up in the back of a vehicle. I didn't imagine the bruises on his face, and I didn't imagine the sound of his breath when we pulled the tape from his mouth. Rowe paused. From the gallery, Troy Maddox entered quietly, flanked by 2 officers. His hair had grown out since his rescue, and a light beard shadowed his jaw. He wore his dress blues today, creased and perfectly tailored, medals pinned to his chest. But his expression was gentler than any military posture could suggest. His eyes locked on the dogs sitting in the hallway, and Charlie, hearing the subtle shift in boots on tile, wagged his tail with recognition. Troy smiled, the first genuine one he'd shown in weeks, and walked over as the court paused for a brief recess. He knelt, one hand resting softly on Charlie's head. "You're my unit, now," he said quietly. "You boys did more for me than half the brass ever could." Charlie leaned into him, letting out a soft huff, and Alpha pressed gently against his leg. Even Bravo, usually aloof, padded over and rested beside them. From the far end of the room, Ada Fiona Chang returned with a small tablet in hand. "Your Honor," she addressed the judge after the recess, "we submit into evidence a recording that has already received over 5 million views on social media. Though not admissible as formal evidence of guilt alone, it clearly shows the defendant's use of force, the behavior of the victim, and the immediate reaction of the dogs involved." The judge nodded. The lights dimmed slightly. On the monitor above the bench, the now familiar video played. Elliot standing by his SUV, drawing his weapon. Charlie lunging, Alpha flanking. The scene played out like a dramatic reenactment. But this was real. The courtroom was silent when the clip ended. Roe rose slowly. Objection. The video is edited, taken from a civilian livestream, lacks chain of custody. Judge Morales glanced at the screen, then back to Roe. Noted. But I saw what I saw. Continue. Outside the courtroom, Cassie Fenley, Doug's daughter, waited with her father in the lobby. She clutched a folded piece of paper in her hand, careful not to smudge it. I stepped out during a recess to find them. Cassie wanted to give Troy something, Doug said, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. The girl handed over the drawing, a crayon portrait of 3 German shepherds standing tall in the desert sun, flanking a figure in uniform tied at the wrists but surrounded by golden light. Above them was a single word in careful block letters, Guardians. I smiled through the weight in my chest. That's going somewhere special. It did. By week's end, the framed drawing would hang in the front hall of Tucson City Hall, next to a brass plaque reading, "In honor of the silent ones who saw what others missed." The early sun broke gently over the hills outside Tucson, casting a golden warmth across the desert scrub and the red clay walls of a new building nestled at the edge of town. It wasn't large, but every inch of it breathed with purpose. The wooden sign above the wide gate read, "The Bravo Shelter." The letters were etched in strong lines beneath the silhouette of 3 proud German shepherds. The center had taken only 2 months to open, but it carried the weight of something older, built not just from brick and wood, but from pain, loyalty, and redemption. Sylvia Ramirez, now wearing denim jeans and a loose sage-green shirt, walked the grounds each morning with a clipboard in hand and a trail of tails following behind her. Her hair, streaked with gray, was pulled back as always, but the tiredness in her eyes had softened into something steadier, calm, even hopeful. Since the trial, she had thrown herself into this project. Some people in town called it her second life. Others, more softly, called it her healing. She just called it necessary. The shelter's heart, however, didn't beat alone. In the back wing, nestled beneath a sloped tin roof, a small apartment had been built. The door bore a simple placard, "Staff Quarters, Troy Maddox." Troy had traded his uniform for jeans and work boots. He wore flannel most days now. His sleeves were always rolled, his left wrist still bearing the faint red scar from the duct tape that had once bound him. His beard had grown in, and though his posture still carried a soldier's discipline, there was a visible ease to his steps. He was the shelter's security and repairman. But more than that, he was its quiet guardian. The dog sensed him like kin. Alpha followed him with unwavering steps, his aging body still alert and eyes sharp. Charlie, always eager, ran point each morning along the fence, checking every post with a bounce in his gait. Bravo, the sentinel, sat near the main gate, ears twitching at every sound beyond the road. That afternoon, the sun was high, and the air shimmered with the soft heat of spring. Inside the lobby, where worn leather chairs lined the walls and a faint scent of cedar drifted from the reception desk, Sylvia was organizing supplies when the door creaked open. In stepped a woman in her early 30s, her dark hair pinned back beneath a wide-brimmed straw hat. She had sunburnt cheeks and calloused hands, a woman more used to field work than shopping malls. Her name was Leanne Porter, a single mother from the next county who'd driven nearly an hour after seeing a video of Charlie on the shelter's website. By her side walked a boy, no more than 8. He was slender and small for his age, with sandy brown hair that curled just slightly over his ears and deep hazel eyes that rarely lifted from the floor. His name was Micah, and he hadn't spoken much since his father, a forest ranger, died in a landslide rescue 6 months earlier. Leanne said he only whispered now, and only to her. Charlie was the first to notice them. The dog trotted toward Micah without hesitation, tail held low, ears relaxed. He stopped just short of the boy and sat still. No bark, no growl, no sudden moves. Micah looked up slowly, and then something shifted. The boy crouched down, reaching out tentatively. Charlie leaned forward, brushing his nose against the boy's hand. Micah smiled, a barely there curve of the mouth. But to Leanne, it was a miracle. "He likes this one," she whispered to Sylvia, eyes already misting. "I think he's been waiting for someone just like Micah," Sylvia said gently. Troy, who'd come in through the back door with a set of tools in hand, paused as he saw the exchange. He nodded silently to Sylvia. She returned it. No words were needed. Later that day, as they walked Leanne through the adoption process, carefully, respectfully, explaining that Charlie was no ordinary dog, Micah stood before a metal plaque mounted near the front desk. He tilted his head to read it aloud, his voice faint but clear. "For those who could not speak, but saved lives all the same. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie." He looked at his mom. "Can I come visit the other two too?" Sylvia bent down beside him. "You can come whenever you like, Micah. This is your place now too." Outside, Alpha lay under the old mesquite tree near the fence, watching as the boy led Charlie out onto the gravel path for their first walk together. The wind picked up a little, and Troy stepped out to feel it on his face. He had stopped flinching at sudden sounds. He had started sleeping with the door unlocked. Later that night, the shelter quieted. Dogs curled in their kennels. The desert darkened to an indigo hush. Sylvia sat on the porch steps with a cup of mint tea in hand, Alpha's head resting gently on her knee. Behind them, in the softly lit hall, Cassie's drawing had been given a new frame. Beneath it hung a small brass plate donated by the town's mayor. It read, "The bravest don't always wear badges. Some have fur, 4 paws, and the patience to wait for what's right." And in the stillness of that Arizona night, the Bravo shelter became more than a refuge. It became a promise. In a world that often moves too fast to notice silent cries for help, 3 stray dogs reminded us that love doesn't always speak. It acts. Their devotion, their instincts, and their courage became a living miracle. Not just for one man, but for everyone who witnessed what loyalty and grace truly mean. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was training. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the hand of God working through the paws of his quietest warriors. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder. Sometimes they arrive on 4 legs, with gentle eyes and a heart willing to fight for someone else's freedom. This story teaches us to never underestimate the power of compassion, and to believe that no matter how lost we may feel, we are never truly forgotten. Even in the darkest hour, God sends light, often from the most unexpected places. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment to let others know you're not alone. And if you believe in the quiet miracles of this world, type Amen in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and pray for all the silent heroes still out there, both human and animal. May God bless each and every one of you watching,